It was an ordinary day in Galilee. The sun was slowly moving towards the horizon, and the sea was calm. Large crowds had gathered to listen to Jesus. He had been teaching all day long. People from different cities came just to hear him speak. Some were sick, some were broken, some were lost, and some were just curious. But when they heard him speak, something inside them changed. It was not just words. It was peace. It was hope. It was truth. As the day ended, the crowd slowly started leaving. Jesus turned to his disciples and said, "Let us go to the other side." It was a simple journey, something they had done many times before. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing seemed dangerous. They all stepped into the boat, and Jesus sat at the back, calm and peaceful. And then something strange happened. Jesus closed his eyes and fell asleep. The boat slowly moved away from the shore. The night was quiet. The water was still. The stars were shining above them. Everything felt normal. To normal. But after some time, the wind started changing. At first it was small, almost unnoticeable, but then it grew stronger. The sky slowly turned dark. Clouds gathered above them. The water started to move. Small waves became bigger waves. The disciples became alert. These were experienced fishermen. They knew the sea very well, but something about this felt different. Heavier, stronger, dangerous. Still, they tried to stay calm. But deep inside, fear had already started growing. Within minutes, everything changed. The wind turned violent. The waves rose high. The boat started shaking violently. Water began entering the boat. Lightning flashed in the distance. Thunder roared above them. The sea was no longer peaceful. It was angry, alive, uncontrollable. The disciples rushed to control the boat. One of them shouted, "Hold the sail." Another yelled, "Move the water out." They were running, shouting, trying everything they knew. But nothing worked. The storm was stronger. The boat was now half filled with water. Fear took over. One of them shouted, "We are going to die." Another cried, "This is it. We cannot survive this." Panic spread everywhere. Their experience meant nothing now. Their strength meant nothing. Skills meant nothing. The storm was in control. And in the middle of all this chaos, Jesus was still sleeping. The disciples looked at him in shock. How could someone sleep in a moment like this? How could someone remain calm when death was so close? One of them ran to him, shaking him strongly and shouting, "Teacher, wake up! Don't you care that we are dying?" His voice was full of fear and desperation. Finally, Jesus opened his eyes. Slowly, calmly, he stood up. The wind was still howling. The waves were still crashing. The storm was still raging. But Jesus was not afraid. He looked at the disciples, then at the storm. Then he spoke. "Peace, be still." Just 3 words. And suddenly, everything stopped. The wind stopped. The waves stopped. The sea became completely calm. Silence filled the air. The storm that was destroying everything just seconds ago disappeared instantly. The water became like glass, still, peaceful, quiet. The disciples stood frozen, could not believe what they were seeing. One of them whispered, "What just happened?" Even the wind and sea obey him. They were shocked, not just by the miracle, but by the authority behind it. Jesus then turned to them and said, "Why are you afraid? Where is your faith?" Those words hit them deeply, because they realized something important. The real storm was not outside the boat. The real storm was inside them. Fear, doubt, panic. And then they understood something powerful. Faith is not tested in calm waters. Faith is tested in storms. Anyone can believe when life is easy, but real faith is when everything is falling apart and you still trust. The boat continued its journey. The water was now peaceful again. The sky slowly cleared. The stars returned. Everything looked normal again. But nothing was the same inside them. They had seen something that changed them forever. And this story is not just about them. It is about every human being. Because life also brings storms. Not on water, but in life. Storms of failure, storms of heartbreak, storms of loneliness, storms of fear. And in those moments it feels like God is silent, like he is sleeping, like nothing is happening. But this story teaches something powerful. Even when he seems silent, he is still present. Even when you feel alone, you are not abandoned. Even when everything feels out of control, you are not forgotten. Storms don't last forever. Fear doesn't last forever. Pain doesn't last forever. But hope always remains. Jesus never promised a life without storms, but he promised peace in the storm. And sometimes that is even greater than stopping it immediately, because it changes you from inside. So if you are going through your own storm right now, remember this moment. Remember the sea that obeyed his voice. Remember the fear that turned into silence. And remember this: you are never alone in your storm. Even in your lowest moment, he's still there, watching, loving, and waiting for you to rise again. Because storms don't last forever, but lessons from them do.